the scientific and practical necessity of giving due consideration to feeling. Healing the split. Our intellect has created a new world that dominates nature and has populated it with monstrous machines. The latter are so indubitably useful that we cannot see even a possibility of getting rid of them or our subservience to them. Man is bound to follow the adventurous promptings of his scientific and inventive mind and to admire himself for his splendid achievements. At the same time, his genius shows the uncanny tendency to invent things that become more and more dangerous because they represent better and better means for wholesale suicide. In view of the rapidly increasing avalanche of world population, man has already begun to seek ways and means of keeping the rising flood at bay. But nature may anticipate all our attempts by turning against man his own creative mind. The H-bomb, for instance, would put an effective stop to overpopulation. In spite of our proud domination of nature, we are still her victims, for we have not even learned to control our own nature. Slowly, but it appears inevitably, we are courting disaster. There are no longer any gods whom we can invoke to help us. The great religions of the world suffer from increasing anemia because the helpful noumena have fled from the woods, rivers, and mountains, and from animals, and the god-men have disappeared underground into the unconscious. There we fool ourselves that they lead an ignominious existence among the relics of our past. Our present lives are dominated by the goddess Reason, who is our greatest and most tragic illusion. By the aid of reason, so we assure ourselves, we have conquered nature. But this is a mere slogan, for the so-called conquest of nature overwhelms us with the natural fact of overpopulation and adds to our troubles by our psychological incapacity to make the necessary political arrangements. It remains quite natural for men to quarrel and to struggle for superiority over one another. How then have we conquered nature? As any change must begin somewhere, it is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must indeed begin with an individual. It might be any one of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. But since nobody seems to know what to do, it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. Certainly the conscious mind seems unable to do anything useful in this respect. Man today is painfully aware of the fact that neither his great religions nor his various philosophies seem to provide him with those powerful animating ideas that would give him the security he needs in face of the present condition of the world. I know what the Buddhists would say. Things would go right if people would only follow the noble eightfold path of the Dharma, doctrine, law, and had true insight into the self. The Christian tells us that if only people had faith in God, we should have a better world. The rationalist insists that if people were intelligent and reasonable, all our problems would be manageable. The trouble is that none of them manages to solve these problems himself. Christians often ask why God does not speak to them, as he is believed to have done in former days. When I hear such questions, it always makes me think of the rabbi who was asked how it could be that God often showed himself to people in the olden days, whereas nowadays nobody ever sees him. The rabbi replied, "Nowadays there is no longer anybody who can bow low enough." This answer hits the nail on the head. We are so captivated by and entangled in our subjective consciousness that we have forgotten the age-old fact that God speaks chiefly through dreams and visions. The Buddhist discards the world of unconscious fantasies as useless illusions. The Christian puts his church and his Bible between himself and his unconscious. And the rational intellectual does not yet know that his consciousness is not his total psyche. This ignorance persists today in spite of the fact that for more than 70 years the unconscious has been a basic scientific concept that is indispensable to any serious psychological investigation. We can no longer afford to be so God Almighty-like as to set ourselves up as judges of the merits or demerits of natural phenomena. We do not base our botany upon the old-fashioned division into useful and useless plants, or our zoology upon the naive distinction between harmless and dangerous animals. But we still complacently assume that consciousness is sense, and the unconscious is nonsense. In science, such an assumption would be laughed out of court. Do microbes, for instance, make sense or nonsense? Whatever the unconscious may be, it is a natural phenomenon, producing symbols that prove to be meaningful. We cannot expect someone who has never looked through a microscope to be an authority on microbes. In the same way, no one who has not made a serious study of natural symbols can be considered a competent judge in this matter. But the general undervaluation of the human soul is so great that neither the great religions, nor the philosophies, nor scientific rationalism have been willing to look at it twice. In spite of the fact that the Catholic Church admits the occurrence of somnia a Deo missa, dreams sent by God, most of its thinkers make no serious attempt to understand dreams. I doubt whether there is a Protestant treatise or doctrine that would stoop so low as to admit the possibility that the vox Dei might be perceived in a dream. But if a theologian really believes in God, by what authority does he suggest that God is unable to speak through dreams? I have spent more than half a century in investigating natural symbols, and I have come to the conclusion that dreams and their symbols are not stupid and meaningless. On the contrary, dreams provide the most interesting information for those who take the trouble to understand their symbols. The results, it is true, have little to do with such worldly concerns as buying and selling, but the meaning of life is not exhaustively explained by one's business life, nor is the deep desire of the human heart answered by a bank account. In a period of human history when all available energy is spent in the investigation of nature, very little attention is paid to the essence of man, which is his psyche, although many researches are made into its conscious functions. But the really complex and unfamiliar part of the mind, from which symbols are produced, is still virtually unexplored. It seems almost incredible that though we receive signals from it every night, deciphering these communications seems too tedious for any but a very few people to be bothered with it. Man's greatest instrument, his psyche, is little thought of, and it is often directly mistrusted and despised. Its only psychological too often means it is nothing. Where exactly does this immense prejudice come from? We have obviously been so busy with the question of what we think that we entirely forget to ask what the unconscious psyche thinks about us. The ideas of Sigmund Freud confirmed for most people the existing contempt for the psyche. Before him it had been merely overlooked and neglected. It has now become a dump for moral refuse. This modern standpoint is surely one-sided and unjust. It does not even accord with the known facts. Our actual knowledge of the unconscious shows that it is a natural phenomenon, and that, like nature herself, is at least neutral. It contains all aspects of human nature, light and dark, beautiful and ugly, good and evil, profound and silly. The study of individual as well as of collective symbolism is an enormous task, and one that has not yet been mastered. But a beginning has been made at last. The early results are encouraging, and they seem to indicate an answer to many so far unanswered questions of present-day mankind. Photo captions. The entrance to the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III. Left. 3 of the 4 evangelists in a relief on Chartres Cathedral appear as animals. The lion is Mark, the ox Luke, the eagle John. Also, animals are 3 of the sons of the Egyptian god Horus, above, circa 1250 B.C. Animals, and groups of 4, are universal religious symbols. In many societies, representations of the sun express man's indefinable religious experience. Above, a decoration on the back of a throne belonging to the 14th century B.C. Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun is dominated by a sun disk. The hands at the end of the rays symbolize the sun's life-giving power. Left, a monk in 20th century Japan prays before a mirror that represents the divine sun in the Shinto religion. Right, tungsten atoms seen with a microscope that magnifies 2 million times. Far right, the spots in center of picture are the farthest visible galaxies. No matter how far man extends his senses, limits to his conscious perception remain. Dissociation means a splitting in the psyche, causing a neurosis. A famous fictional example of this state is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, by the Scots author R.L. Stevenson. In the story, Jekyll's split took the form of a physical change, rather than, as in reality, an inner psychic state. Left, Mr. Hyde, from the 1932 film of the story, Jekyll's other half. Primitive people call dissociation loss of a soul. They believe that a man has a bush soul as well as his own. Right, a Nyanga tribesman of West Central Africa wearing a mask of the hornbill, the bird that he identifies with his bush soul. Far right, telephonists on a busy switchboard handle many calls at once. In such jobs, people split off parts of their conscious minds to concentrate. But this split is controlled and temporary, not a spontaneous, abnormal dissociation. Left, many of the great pioneers of modern psychoanalysis, photographed at a Congress of Psychoanalysis in 1911 at Weimar, Germany. The key, below left, identifies some of the major figures. 1. Sigmund Freud, Vienna. 2. Otto Rank, Vienna. 3. Ludwig Binswanger, Kreuzlingen. 4. A. Brill. 5. Max Eitingon, Berlin. 6. James J. Putnam, Boston. 7. Ernest Jones, Toronto. 8. Wilhelm Stekel, Vienna. 9. Eugen Bleuler, Zurich. 10. Emma Jung, Küsnacht. 11. Sándor Ferenczi, Budapest. 12. C.G. Jung, Küsnacht. Right. The inkblot test, devised by the Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach. The shape of the blot can serve as a stimulus for free association. In fact, almost any irregular free shape can spark off the associative process. Leonardo da Vinci wrote in his notebooks, "It should not be hard for you to stop sometimes and look into the stains of walls, or ashes of a fire, or clouds, or mud, or like places, in which you may find really marvelous ideas." Two different possible stimuli of free association: the whirling prayer wheel of a Tibetan beggar, left, or a fortune-teller's crystal ball, right, a modern crystal gazer at a British fair. One of the countless symbolic or allegorical images of the sexual act is a deer hunt, right, a detail from a painting by the 16th century German artist Kronach. The sexual implication of the deer hunt is underlined by a medieval English folk song called The Keeper. The first doe that he shot at he missed, and the second doe he trimmed he kissed, and the third ran away in a young man's heart. She's amongst the leaves of the green-o. A key in a lock may be a sexual symbol, but not invariably. Left, a section of an altarpiece by the 15th century Flemish artist Campin. The door was intended to symbolize hope, the lock to symbolize charity, and the key to symbolize the desire for God. Below, a British bishop, during the consecration of a church, carries out a traditional ceremony by knocking on the church door with a staff, which is obviously not a phallic symbol, but a symbol of authority and the shepherd's crook. No individual symbolic image can be said to have a dogmatically fixed, generalized meaning. The anima is the female element in the male unconscious. It and the animus in the female unconscious are discussed in Chapter 3. This inner duality is often symbolized by a hermaphroditic figure, like the crowned hermaphrodite above right from a 17th century alchemical manuscript. Right, a physical image of man's psychic bisexuality, a human cell with its chromosomes. All organisms have two sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. Misoneism, an unreasoning fear and hatred of new ideas, was a major block to public acceptance of modern psychology. It also opposed Darwin's theories of evolution, as when an American schoolteacher named Scopes was tried in 1925 for teaching evolution. Far left, at the trial, the lawyer Clarence Darrow defending Scopes. Center left, Scopes himself. Equally anti-Darwin is the cartoon, left, from an 1861 issue of Britain's magazine Punch. Right, a light-hearted look at Misoneism by the American humorist James Thurber, whose aunt, he wrote, was afraid that electricity was leaking all over the place. In cases of extreme mass hysteria, which was in the past called possession, the conscious mind and ordinary sense perception seem eclipsed. Left. The frenzy of a Balinese sword dance causes the dancers to fall into trances, and sometimes to turn their weapons against themselves. Right. Rock and roll music, in its heyday, seemed to induce an almost comparable trance-like excitement. Among primitives, possession implies that a god or demon has taken over a human body. Above left, a Haitian woman collapses in a religious ecstasy. Above, center, and right, Haitians possessed by the god Jeda, who is invariably manifested in this position, legs crossed, cigarette in mouth. Left. A religious cult in Tennessee, USA, today, whose ceremonies include the handling of poisonous snakes. Hysteria is induced by music, singing, and hand-clapping. Then the people pass the snakes from hand to hand. Sometimes participants are fatally bitten. The toy cars forming the Volkswagen trademark in this advertisement may have a trigger effect on a reader's mind, stirring unconscious memories of childhood. If these memories are pleasant, the pleasure may be associated unconsciously with the product and brand name. The 19th century German chemist Kekulé, researching into the molecular structure of benzene, dreamed of a snake with its tail in its mouth. This is an age-old symbol. Left, a representation of it from a 3rd century BC Greek manuscript. He interpreted the dream to mean that the structure was a closed carbon ring, as on the page far left, from his Textbook of Organic Chemistry, 1861. Right. An ordinary European highway with a familiar sign that means, "Look out for animals crossing." But the motorists, their shadows appear in the foreground as they leave their car, see an elephant, a rhinoceros, even a dinosaur. This painting of a dream, by the modern Swiss artist Erhard Jacobi, accurately depicts the apparently illogical, incoherent nature of dream imagery. On these pages, further examples of the irrational, fantastic nature of dreams. Above left, owls and bats swarm over a dreaming man in an etching by the 18th century Spanish artist Goya. Dragons or similar monsters are common dream images. Left, a dragon pursues a dreamer in a woodcut from The Dream of Polifilo, a fantasy written by a 15th century Italian monk, Francesco Colonna. Above, a painting entitled Time is a River Without Banks by the modern artist Marc Chagall. The unexpected association of these images, fish, violin, clock, lovers, has all the strangeness of a dream. The mythological aspect of ordinary numbers appears in Mayan reliefs, top of page, circa AD 730, which personify numerical divisions of time as gods. The pyramid of dots above represents the tetractys of Greek Pythagorean philosophy, 6th century BC. It includes 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, making a total of 10. Both 4 and 10 were worshipped as divinities by the Pythagoreans. Not only numbers, but such familiar objects as stones and trees can have symbolic importance for many people. Left, rough stones placed on the roadside by travelers in India represent the lingam, the Hindu phallic symbol of creativity. Right, a tree in West Africa that the tribesmen call a juju or spirit tree, and to which they ascribe magical power. Left, a witch doctor from Cameroon wearing a lion mask. He isn't pretending to be a lion. He is convinced that he is a lion. Like the Nyanga tribesman and his bird mask, page 25, he shares a psychic identity with the animal, an identity that exists in the realm of myth and symbolism. Modern rational man has tried to cut himself off from such psychic associations, which nevertheless survive in the unconscious. To him, a spade is a spade, and a lion is only what the dictionary, right, says it is. Lion, noun. A large, fierce, tawny, loud-roaring animal of the cat family, the male with shaggy mane. Figurative, a man of unusual courage. Astronomy, the constellation or the sign Leo, any object of interest, especially a famous or conspicuous person much sought after, from the lions once kept in the Tower, one of the sights of London. An old Scots coin with a lion on the obverse, worth 74 shillings Scots, James VI. Feminine, lioness. Names, Lioncell, Lioncel, Lioncell, Lioncelle, Lionel. Heraldry, a small lion used as a bearing. Lionet, a young lion. Lionheart, one with great courage. Adjective, lion-hearted. Noun, lion hunter, a hunter of lions, one who runs after celebrities. Verb, transitive, lionize, to treat as a lion or object of interest, to go around the sights of, to show the sights to. Noun, lionism, lionizing, lion-like appearance in leprosy. Adjectives, lion-like, lionly. Lion's provider, the jackal, supposed to attend upon the lion, really his hanger-on. Lion's share, the whole or greater part. Left, St. Paul struck down by the impact of his vision of Christ, in a painting by the 16th century Italian artist Caravaggio. Above, Javanese farmers sacrifice a cock to protect their fields from spirits. Such beliefs and practices are fundamental in primitive life. Above, in a modern sculpture by Britain's Jacob Epstein, man is seen as a mechanized monster, perhaps an image of today's evil spirits. Left, two further visualizations of spirits. Top, hellish demons descend on St. Anthony, a painting by the 16th century German artist Grunewald. Below, in the center panel of a 19th century Japanese triptych, the ghost of a murdered man strikes down his killer. Ideological conflict breeds many of modern man's demons. Right, a cartoon by America's Gahan Wilson depicts the shadow of the former Russian leader Khrushchev as a monstrous death machine. Far right, a cartoon from the Russian magazine Krokodil shows colonialism as a demonic wolf being driven into the sea by the flags of various independent African nations. Left, two influences to which an individual's consciousness is subjected: advertising, a 1960s American advertisement stressing sociability, and political propaganda, a French poster for a 1962 referendum urging a vote of yes, but plastered with the opposition's no. These and other influences may cause us to live in ways unsuited to our individual natures, and the psychic imbalance that can follow must be compensated for by the unconscious. The lighthouse keeper, Wright, in a cartoon by America's Roland V. Wilson, has apparently become a little disturbed psychologically by his isolation. His unconscious, in its compensatory function, has produced a hallucinatory companion, to whom the keeper confesses, in the cartoon caption, "Not only that, Bill, but I caught myself talking to myself again yesterday." The Delphic oracle, below, being consulted by King Aegeus of Athens, from a vase painting. Messages from the unconscious are often as cryptic and ambiguous as were the oracle's utterances. Left, a photograph of Jung, fourth from the right, in 1926 with the tribesmen of Mount Elgon, Kenya. Jung's first-hand study of primitive societies led to many of his most valuable psychological insights. Right, two dream books, one from 20th century Britain and the other from ancient Egypt. The latter is among the oldest written documents extant, circa 2000 BC. Such ready-made rule-of-thumb interpretation of dreams is worthless. Dreams are highly individualized, and their symbolism cannot be pigeonholed. Top of page. A famous example of the common dream of growing larger. A drawing from Alice in Wonderland, 1877, shows Alice growing to fill a house. Center. The equally common dream of flying, in a 19th century drawing by the British artist William Blake, entitled, "Oh, How I Dreamt of Things Impossible." Inanimate objects sometimes seem to act symbolically. Left, the clock of Frederick the Great, which stopped when its owner died in 1786. Symbols are produced spontaneously from the unconscious, though they may later be consciously elaborated. Right, the Ankh, ancient Egypt's symbol of life, the universe, and man. By contrast, the airways insignia, far right, are consciously contrived signs, not symbols. Right, Jung's mother and father. Jung's interest in ancient religion and mythology drew him away from the religious world of his parents. His father was a pastor, as shown by the dream, discussed on this page, that he had while working with Freud. Far right, Jung at Burghülzli Hospital, Zurich, where he worked in 1900 as a psychiatrist. An assertive extrovert overpowers a withdrawn introvert in a cartoon by America's Jules Feiffer. These Jungian terms for human types are not dogmatic. For instance, Gandhi, right, was both an ascetic, introvert, and a political leader, extrovert. Any individual, any face in the crowd, far right, can only more or less be categorized. The compass of the psyche, another Jungian way of looking at people in general. Each point on the compass has its opposite. For a thinking type, the feeling side would be least developed. Feeling here means the faculty of weighing and evaluating experience in the way that one might say, "I feel that is a good thing to do," without needing to analyze or rationalize the why of the action. Of course, there is overlapping in each individual. In a sensation person, the thinking or the feeling side could be almost as strong, and intuition, the opposite, would be weakest. Narrator's note. This illustration consists of two circles divided into quadrants. The first of them has sensation at the 12 o'clock position with an arrow below pointing clockwise. Then at 3 o'clock, thought, at 6 o'clock, intuition, and at 9 o'clock, feeling. The lower half of the circle is shaded. The second circle has thought in the 12 o'clock position with an arrow beneath pointing both clockwise and counterclockwise. Intuition is at 3 o'clock, feeling at 6 o'clock, and sensation at 9 o'clock. Again, the lower half of the circle is shaded. End of narrator's note. Left, a down-and-out alcoholic in a New York slum, from the 1955 film On the Bowery. Such a figure might appear in the dreams of a man who felt himself to be superior to others. In this way, his unconscious would be compensating for his conscious mind's one-sidedness. Right, the nightmare, painted by the 18th century Swiss-born artist Henry Fuseli. Almost everyone has been awakened, upset, or disturbed by his dreams. Our sleep does not appear to be protected from the contents of the unconscious. Right, the heroic dreams with which Walter Mitty, in the 1947 film of James Thurber's story, compensates his sense of inferiority. The madhouse, painted by Goya. Note the king and the bishop on the right. Schizophrenia often takes the form of personal exaltation. As this museum display shows, the fetus of man resembles those of other animals, and thus provides an indication of man's physical evolution. The psyche, too, has evolved, and some contents of modern man's unconscious resemble products of the mind of ancient man. Jung termed these products archetypal images. Man's unconscious archetypal images are as instinctive as the ability of geese to migrate in formation, as ants forming organized societies, as bees' tail-wagging dance above that communicates to the hive the exact location of a food source. A modern professor had a vision exactly like a woodcut in an old book that he had never seen. Right, the book's title page, and another woodcut symbolizing the male and female principles united. Such archetypal symbols arise from the psyche's age-old collective basis. Parallels to archetypal motifs in the girl's first dream, page 70. Left, from Strasbourg Cathedral, Christ crucified on Adam's grave, symbolizing the theme of rebirth, Christ as the second Adam. In a Navajo sand painting, above, the horned heads are the four corners of the world. In Britain's royal coronation ceremony, the monarch, right, Queen Elizabeth II in 1953, is presented to the people at the four doors of Westminster Abbey. Above, the hero god Raven of the Haida Indians of America's Pacific coast in the belly of a whale, corresponding to the devouring monster motif in the girl's first dream, page 70. The girl's second dream, of angels in hell and demons in heaven, seems to embody the idea of the relativity of morality. The same concept is expressed in the dual aspect of the fallen angel, who is both Satan, the devil, and right, Lucifer, the resplendent bringer of light. These opposites can also be seen in the figure of God, far right, in a drawing by Blake. He appears to Job in a dream with a cloven hoof like a demon's. The little girl's dreams, page 70, contain symbols of creation, death, and rebirth, which resemble the teachings given to adolescents in primitive initiation rituals. Left, the end of a Navajo ceremony. A girl, having become a woman, goes into the desert to meditate. Death and rebirth symbolism also appears in dreams at the end of life, when the approach of death casts a shadow before it. Right, one of Goya's last paintings. The strange creature, apparently a dog, that emerges from the dark, can be interpreted as the artist's foreshadowing of his death. In many mythologies, dogs appear as guides to the land of the dead. Some dreams seem to predict the future, perhaps due to unconscious knowledge of future possibilities. Thus, dreams were long used as divination. In Greece, the sick would ask the healing god Asclepius for a dream indicating a cure. Left, a relief depicts such a dream cure. A snake, the god's symbol, bites a man's diseased shoulder, and the god, far left, heals the shoulder. Right, Constantine, an Italian painting, circa 1460, dreaming before a battle that was to make him Roman emperor. He dreamed of the cross, a symbol of Christ, and a voice said, "In this sign, conquer." He took the sign as his emblem, won the battle, and was thus converted to Christianity. In a dream quoted from Artemidorus on this page, a burning house symbolizes a fever. The human body is often represented as a house. Left, from an 18th century Hebrew encyclopedia, the body and a house are compared in detail. Turrets as ears, windows as eyes, a furnace as stomach, etc. Right, in a cartoon by James Thurber, a henpecked husband sees his home and his wife as the same being. The energy of archetypes can be focused, through rituals and other appeals to mass emotion, to move people to collective action. The Nazis knew this and used versions of Teutonic myths to help rally the country to their cause. Far right, a propaganda painting of Hitler as a heroic crusader. Right, a solstice festival celebrated in summer by the Hitler Youth, a revival of an ancient pagan festival. Top, a child's painting of Christmas includes the familiar tree decorated with candles. The evergreen tree is connected with Christ through the symbolism of the winter solstice and the New Year, the new eon of Christianity. There are many links between Christ and the tree symbol. The cross is often seen as a tree, as in a medieval Italian fresco, left, of Christ crucified on the tree of knowledge. Candles in Christian ceremonies symbolize divine light, as in the Swedish festival of St. Lucia, above, where girls wear crowns of burning candles. Two examples of belief in the magical quality of breath. Below left, a Zulu witch doctor cures a patient by blowing into his ear through a cow's horn to drive the spirits out. Below, a medieval painting of the creation depicts God breathing life into Adam. Right, In a 13th century Italian painting, Christ heals a blind man with spittle, which, like breath, has long been believed to have a life-giving ability. Our world is dissociated like a neurotic. Left, the Berlin Wall. Every society has its idea of the archetypal paradise or golden age that it is believed once existed and will exist again. Left, a 19th century American painting embodies the idea of a past utopia. It shows William Penn's treaty with the Indians in 1682 occurring in an ideal setting where all is harmony and peace. Below left, a reflection of the idea of a utopia yet to come. A poster in a Moscow park shows Lenin leading the Russian people toward the future. Above, the Garden of Eden, depicted as a walled and womb-like garden in a 15th century French painting and showing the expulsion of Adam and Eve. Right, a golden age of primitive naturalness is pictured in a 16th century painting by Cranach entitled Earthly Paradise. Far right, the 16th century Flemish artist Bruegel's Land of Cockaigne, a mythical land of sensual delights and easy living, stories of which were widely popular in medieval Europe, especially among the hard-working peasants and serfs. Left, the burial coffin of a South American Cayapas Indian. The dead man is provided with food and clothing for his life after death. Religious symbols and beliefs of every kind give meaning to men's lives. Ancient peoples grieved over death. Right, an Egyptian figurine representing mourning, which was found in a tomb. Yet their beliefs made them also think of death as a positive transformation. Above, a child's drawing of a tree with the sun above it. A tree is one of the best examples of a motif that often appears in dreams and elsewhere, and that can have an incredible variety of meanings. It might symbolize evolution, physical growth, or psychological maturation. It might symbolize sacrifice or death, Christ's crucifixion on the tree. It might be a phallic symbol. It might be a great deal more. And such other common dream motifs as the cross, right, or the lingam, far right, can also have a vast array of symbolic meanings. Ancient mythological beings are now curiosities in museums, right, but the archetypes they expressed have not lost their power to affect men's minds. Perhaps the monsters of modern horror films, far right, are distorted versions of archetypes that will no longer be repressed. Repressed unconscious contents can erupt destructively in the form of negative emotions, as in World War II. Far left, Jewish prisoners in Warsaw after the 1943 uprising. Left, footwear of the dead stacked at Auschwitz. Right, Australian Aborigines who have disintegrated since they lost their religious beliefs through contact with civilization. This tribe now numbers only a few hundred. The ancient Chinese connected the moon with the goddess Kuan Yin, pictured above. Other societies have personified the moon as a divinity. And though modern spaceflight has proved that the moon is only a cratered ball of dirt, left, we have retained something of the archetypal attitude in our familiar association of the moon with love and romance. In a child's unconscious, we can see the power and universality of archetypal symbols. A 7-year-old's painting, left, a huge sun driving away black birds, demons of the night, has the flavor of a true myth. Children at play, right, spontaneously dance in as natural a form of self-expression as the ceremonial dances of primitives. Ancient folklore still exists in children's ritual beliefs. For instance, children all over Britain and elsewhere believe it is lucky to see a white horse, which is a well-known symbol of life. A Celtic goddess of creativity, Epona, shown far right, riding a horse, was often personified as a white mare. Above left, the 20th century's greatest city, New York. Below, the end of another city, Hiroshima, 1945. Though man may seem to have gained ascendance over nature, Jung always pointed out that man has not yet gained control over his own nature. Above, Rembrandt's Philosopher with an Open Book, 1633. The inward-looking old man provides an image of Jung's belief that each of us must explore his own unconscious. The unconscious must not be ignored. It is as natural, as limitless, and as powerful as the stars. End of photo captions. Part 2. Ancient Myths and Modern Man, by Joseph L. Henderson. The Eternal Symbols. The ancient history of man is being meaningfully rediscovered today in the symbolic images and myths that have survived ancient man. As archaeologists dig deep into the past, it is less the events of historical time that we learn to treasure than the statues, designs, temples, and languages that tell of old beliefs. Other symbols are revealed to us by the philologists and religious historians who can translate these beliefs into intelligible modern concepts. These, in turn, are brought to life by the cultural anthropologists. They can show that the same symbolic patterns can be found in the rituals or myths of small tribal societies still existing, unchanged for centuries, on the outskirts of civilization. All such researches have done much to correct the one-sided attitude of those modern men who maintain that such symbols belong to the peoples of antiquity or to backward modern tribes, and are therefore irrelevant to the complexities of modern life. In London or New York, we may dismiss the fertility rites of Neolithic man as archaic superstition. If anyone claims to have seen a vision or heard voices, he is not treated as a saint or as an oracle. It is said he is mentally disturbed. We read the myths of the ancient Greeks or the folk stories of American Indians, but we fail to see any connection between them and our attitudes to the heroes or dramatic events of today. Yet the connections are there, and the symbols that represent them have not lost their relevance for mankind. One of the main contributions of our time to the understanding and revaluing of such eternal symbols has been made by Dr. Jung's School of Analytical Psychology. It has helped to break down the arbitrary distinction between primitive man, to whom symbols seem a natural part of everyday life, and modern man, for whom symbols are apparently meaningless and irrelevant. As Dr. Jung has pointed out earlier in this book, the human mind has its own history, and the psyche retains traces left from previous stages of its development. More than this, the contents of the unconscious exert a formative influence on the psyche. Consciously we may ignore them, but unconsciously we respond to them and to the symbolic forms, including dreams, in which they express themselves. The individual may feel that his dreams are spontaneous and disconnected, but over a long period of time the analyst can observe a series of dream images and note that they have a meaningful pattern, and by understanding this, his patient may eventually acquire a new attitude to life. Some of the symbols in such dreams derive from what Dr. Jung has called the collective unconscious. That is, the part of the psyche that retains and transmits the common psychological inheritance of mankind. These symbols are so ancient and unfamiliar to modern man that he cannot directly understand or assimilate them. It is here that the analyst can help. Possibly the patient must be freed from the encumbrance of symbols that have grown stale and inappropriate, or possibly he must be assisted to discover the abiding value of an old symbol that, far from being dead, is seeking to be reborn in modern form. Before the analyst can effectively explore the meaning of symbols with a patient, he must himself acquire a wider knowledge of their origins and significance. For the analogies between ancient myths and the stories that appear in the dreams of modern patients are neither trivial nor accidental. They exist because the unconscious mind of modern man preserves the symbol-making capacity that once found expression in the beliefs and rituals of the primitive. And that capacity still plays a role of vital psychic importance. In more ways than we realize, we are dependent on the messages that are carried by such symbols, and both our attitudes and our behavior are profoundly influenced by them. In wartime, for instance, one finds increased interest in the works of Homer, Shakespeare, and Tolstoy, and we read with a new understanding those passages that give war its enduring or archetypal meaning. They evoke a response from us that is much more profound than it could be from someone who has never known the intense emotional experience of war. The battles on the plains of Troy were utterly unlike the fighting at Agincourt or Borodino, yet the great writers are able to transcend the differences of time and place and to express themes that are universal. We respond because these themes are fundamentally symbolic. A more striking example should be familiar to anyone who has grown up in a Christian society. At Christmas, we may express our inner feeling for the mythological birth of a semi-divine child, even though we may not believe in the doctrine of the virgin birth of Christ or have any kind of conscious religious faith. Unknowingly, we have fallen in with the symbolism of rebirth. This is a relic of an immensely older solstice festival, which carries the hope that the fading winter landscape of the northern hemisphere will be renewed. For all our sophistication, we find satisfaction in this symbolic festival, just as we join with our children at Easter in the pleasant ritual of Easter eggs and Easter rabbits. But do we understand what we do, or see the connection between the story of Christ's birth, death, and resurrection and the folk symbolism of Easter? Usually we do not even care to consider such things intellectually. Yet they complement each other. Christ's crucifixion on Good Friday seems at first sight to belong to the same pattern of fertility symbolism that one finds in the rituals of such other saviors as Osiris, Tammuz, and Orpheus. They too were of divine or semi-divine birth. They flourished, were killed, and were reborn. They belonged, in fact, to cyclic religions in which the death and rebirth of the God-King was an eternally recurring myth. But the resurrection of Christ on Easter Sunday is much less satisfying from a ritual point of view than is the symbolism of the cyclic religions. For Christ ascends to sit at the right hand of God the Father. His resurrection occurs once and for all. It is this finality of the Christian concept of the resurrection, the Christian idea of the Last Judgment has a similar closed theme, that distinguishes Christianity from other God-King myths. It happened once, and the ritual merely commemorates it. But this sense of finality is probably one reason why early Christians, still influenced by pre-Christian traditions, felt that Christianity needed to be supplemented by some elements of an older fertility ritual. They needed the recurring promise of rebirth, and that is what is symbolized by the egg and the rabbit of Easter. Note, concerning the finality of Christ's resurrection, Christianity is an eschatological religion, meaning it has a final end in view that becomes synonymous with the Last Judgment. Other religions, in which matriarchal elements of tribal culture are preserved, for example Orphism, are cyclical, as demonstrated by Iliada in The Myth of the Eternal Return. New York, Bollingen Pantheon, 1954. End of note. I have taken two quite different examples to show how modern man continues to respond to profound psychic influences of a kind that consciously he dismisses as little more than the folk tales of superstitious and uneducated peoples. But it is necessary to go much further than this. The more closely one looks at the history of symbolism and at the role that symbols have played in the life of many different cultures, the more one understands that there is also a recreative meaning in these symbols. Some symbols relate to childhood and the transition to adolescence, others to maturity, and others again to the experience of old age, when man is preparing for his inevitable death. Dr. Jung has described how the dreams of a girl of 8 contained the symbols one normally associates with old age. Her dreams presented aspects of initiation into life as belonging to the same archetypal pattern as initiation into death. This progression of symbolic ideas may take place, therefore, within the unconscious mind of modern man, just as it took place in the rituals of ancient societies. This crucial link between archaic or primitive myths and the symbols produced by the unconscious is of immense practical importance to the analyst. It enables him to identify and to interpret these symbols in a context that gives them historical perspective as well as psychological meaning. I shall now take some of the more important myths of antiquity and show how and to what purpose they are analogous to the symbolic material that we encounter in our dreams. End of Side 3. To continue, turn the cassette over.